Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys a how-to basics to intermediate level arena guide. Now, I know a lot of you guys that watch my content are better than just new players in arena, but I think you're going to pick up some pretty important tips in this video as I'm going to cover a lot of the broad ranges of what it takes to succeed in arena, so I hope you guys enjoy it nonetheless. Now, doing well in arena is very different than doing well in constructed, and there's a lot of different skills that you have to master to do well. At its peak, you can play arena as an infinite player. This may surprise some people to hear, but I have seen people playing infinite below 6 wins average. Now, in arena, you play until you get 3 losses, so the average for everyone is 3 wins, 3 losses by nature. Now, you obviously have to be a pretty good player to get even over 5 wins, but a lot of people expect that you have to go over 7 wins to be infinite. That is not true. If you only play 1 or 2 arenas a day, you probably are infinite past 4 wins. But there is a bit of an exception here that you have to understand. The rewards for doing each arena, yes, you get the pack, but if you want to play constantly without putting money into the game, you have to do pretty well. And not only that, you have to get those high win numbers. So the difference is when you're getting a 7 win, you're guaranteed 150 gold. But if you go below 7 wins, you can get as little as 50 or 60 gold for 6 wins. So it's a huge break point to hit 7 wins. More so, it's a very important aspect of being infinite in arena to go over 9 wins every so often. If one player is always getting 6 wins and another is getting an even split of exactly 3 or exactly 9 wins, the player who's able to go high up in arena will net a lot more gold because the high wins in arena are very top heavy with the rewards. It's very rewarding to even occasionally hit those high arena win numbers, and that's what I'm going to try to get you guys today. So this video is split into 2 segments. The first one is drafting your deck and then the gameplay. Now, when it comes to playing arena, you're playing with a new deck every single time, so you have to understand how to basically draft your deck. And you do that by understanding how other people are going to draft their deck, because it's a multiplayer game. It's a competition. Your deck is what it is, but it's going to be matched up against other people who are also drafting their own deck. So there's a lot of patterns to try to recognize and do well in. So the first thing when you're drafting is, picking the class. So when you start arena, you're given the choice between 3 classes. And you know what? If you want to play for fun, pick the class you like. Arena is generally pretty balanced, but if you're trying to get better, if you're trying to improve your win average, you actually probably should pick the classes that have higher overall win rates. Even if you perhaps don't like playing them, at the start it's important to play them because you can understand how other people are playing those classes. For instance, right now this changes all the time, so it's something you have to look up. It's not a given. Mage right now is the most winning class in arena, and you can check many different sources that collect arena statistics on the internet. This is from Hearthstone Replay, for instance. So mage is the #1 class. If you see mage, you should pick it. Because, not only should you be good at playing mage, because you'll be rewarded for that, but people generally pick the best classes all the time. So if mage is really good right now, it's very important for you to learn how to play mage because you'll be playing against a lot of other mages. So pick the right class, especially if you're new. If you're just a new player and you're just picking the class that you like, you'll still get better, but you'll get better slower. Now, when you're drafting the deck, a lot of people are going to be using draft assist tools. I'm partnered with Hearth Arena. You guys can check that out if you want, and it will tell you how good each of the cards are. But these are always going to be more or less training wheels. Yes, you can do without them, but probably they'll help you. Even someone like me, a very experienced arena player, I find value in using these draft assist tools, not because they tell me how to play, but because sometimes I might make a mistake. Sometimes I might not realize just how much synergy exists in my deck and sways me to pick a card I otherwise wouldn't have thought to pick. It basically prevents me from making mistakes from time to time, and it gives me another opinion. So yes, these are not necessary, but a lot of people are using them, and if you're new to Arena, you're going to be at a disadvantage again. You're still going to do okay, but you're going to get to that place where you want to be slower if you're not using these tools. Now, there are basic concepts to understanding which cards are good and the flow of the draft. So let's go over those, and it's always important to remind yourself these aspects of the game, even if you are using the draft assist tools. Don't just mindlessly pick. Understand why you're being suggested these cards. Understand why these cards are good, because the difference between a good player and a great player is finding exceptions that these systems miss. Now, when you're drafting in Arena, what cards are good? Standalone cards are good. Standalone cards are cards that don't require other synergies. Because, well, Arena doesn't have a lot of synergies. You're not going to get your crazy combo deck in Arena. You're not even going to get your extremely powerful win condition based control deck in Arena. You might think of like a control warlock in Constructed. You might think you can get that in Arena. Now you might, but you probably won't. What you're going to be missing is the large number of demons and the Death Knight card, which is kind of the win condition of the deck. So a control deck in Arena might seem like a control deck in Constructed without that powerful win condition, which is more or less of a combo within a control deck. So most of the decks that you're going to see in Arena are control, some aggro, but in any case, you are playing the zoo game. And the zoo game involves you playing stats. Stats are good. Stats are really good. So 1-drops generally have pretty poor stats overall, but some of them are exceptional. So it's really important to get those few exceptional 1-drops. If you see like Mana Worm, oh man, you are picking that. If you see a 1-mana 2/1 Murloc, probably you don't want to pick that. Now, if you're playing an aggro deck, you might make that exception, and that might make you a great player overall, and you'll have to make those exceptions. They're exceptions because they're not rules, so you'll have to figure out the exceptions to these rules. But that's kind of how it works. You need to have a good balance of cards. But before that, let's go over the flow of drafting a deck. When you first start the draft, you got your class and you're starting to pick cards. The general rule that I abide by is the first third of the draft, so the first 10 cards, you just pick the best cards. That's it. Now, you might not know what those cards are, but if you're using draft assist tools and you just keep playing and you see which decks are winning and which cards are being used in these decks that are winning, you'll slowly understand which cards are really good. So in the first third of the draft, you pick cards that are really good. And the cards that are really good are typically really good standalone cards, like high statted cards. Even like a 4-mana 4/5 Yeti would be very good. Board clear cards are very good. Efficient hard removal is very good. We're talking about like polymorph level. And weapons are very good. And weapons are very good because you sacrifice health to gain advantage on the board. And we'll talk about that in the gameplay section. So those are typically the best cards. In the first 10 cards of your arena draft, you just pick the best cards no matter what. In the second third, so the next 10 cards in your arena draft, you're still picking the best cards, but you have a synergy consideration. So if you've just picked the best cards, you're playing Paladin, and you've miraculously drafted like 4 Spike Ridge Steeds, but you're in the second third of your draft, and you realize you don't actually have that many minions. So even though you might be offered another Spike Ridge Steed, you have to maybe think about the fact that you might not actually have a game state allowing you to play your Spike Ridge Steed as soon as possible, typically on turn 6, making you possibly pick a lower quality card, maybe a weapon, maybe a minion, over another Spike Ridge Steed. So you have to think about whether this card that is normally the best standalone card is really going to go well with your deck. You have to have a synergy consideration in that second third of your draft. In the final 10 cards, you are drafting cards that are missing from your deck. Now, this is when the base value of a card matters a lot less. It still matters a lot, but it matters a lot less than the previous 20 cards. In the last 10 cards, you have to see how your deck is working out. Do you have enough taunts? Do you have enough board clears? Do you have enough hard removal? Now, some classes in the game, like Rogue, doesn't have a board clear. So yeah, you might need maybe more taunts than normal if you're playing more of a control rogue, or maybe more early game than normal because, well, you're playing an aggro rogue. So you have to figure out what type of deck you're playing, and you have to fill in the gaps in the last third of your draft. As a rule of thumb, you're looking for at least 6 2-drops, and I would say at least 5 3-drops per deck. You might not always get that, so you might have to be flexible and understand how you can fill these gaps best. Now, after 3-drops, it gets a little bit complicated. If you have a lot of 4-drops, you shouldn't have that many 2-drops. And the reason is, on turn 4, a lot of the time you can play 2 2-drops or a 2-drop and a hero power. So the 2-drops and 3-drops are kind of set in stone, but if you can't reach those goals, you can make it up maybe with 1-drops, maybe with 4-drops. However, if you don't have enough 4-drops, because the drafting aspect is fairly random, if you don't have enough 4-drops offered to you, you should actually get an overabundance of 2-drops, because you can play double 2-drop on turn 4, and it will actually be a very strong play. You're looking for decently statted standalone cards in general. You're looking for proactive cards. So, a Frostbolt kind of is a 2-drop because your opponent will almost always have a 2-drop, and you can use a Frostbolt to kill his 2-drop. But, cards like Card Draw, extremely low statted cards with situational effects, those are not drops. Okay, so let's, for instance, talk about Mana Tide Totem. I'm going to use this as an example later on. It's a great card to illustrate how it works. So Mana Tide Totem, it's a minion, and it costs 3 mana. Is it good to play on turn 3? No. Because if you play this on turn 3, yes, you'll get your card, but then what if your opponent plays a 3-mana 3/3, kills the Mana Tide Totem, and then your board state is extremely disadvantaged. So you want a fairly high number of 2-drops and 3-drops, but cards with extremely poor stats, cards that are synergy, situational removal, card draw, those are not drops. Drops are proactive cards, or cards that can almost always be played on that turn. Like a Frostbolt will almost always be playable on turn 2 or 3. So Frostbolt kind of counts in this situation. And you want to follow that rule. Your curve is generally you want to be kind of triangular, but because you've picked cards for card quality in your first third of the draft, there may be a few exceptions. Now, once you get north of 5 mana, so anything 6 mana or higher, you have to be careful to pick that card, because if you're playing like, a 6 mana, 7 mana card and your opponent has hard removal for it, you might just get tempoed out of the game. If you pay 7 mana for something, use up your whole turn, and then your opponent, removes it for 3 and then plays his own 7 mana card, you're going to be in serious trouble. So cards that go over 6 mana or higher, they need to have very strong abilities, notably strong stats at the very least, and in general, you still don't want very many. And the reason you don't want very many is you can't play multiple cards on the same turn. It's very difficult if you're losing to come back on the board. And if you're playing one card at a time, it's almost impossible. So the idea is you can have, a fairly large number of 5-drops because you can consistently play 2 of them on the same turn. But if you have too many 6-drops in your deck, and let's say your hand is 4 cards and all those 4 cards cost 6 mana and you have a total of 10 mana, all of your next 4 turns are going to be terrible. So that's why it's very, you should exercise caution in picking too many cards over 5 mana. 6 mana or higher, don't pick too many of them. And with that, and honestly a lot of practice, you should end up with pretty good decks in Arena. Experiment a little bit, see what you like, do your best. In terms of the gameplay in Arena, again, is fairly different than Constructed, and it's important to master it. And once again, probably the most useful tool is your experience. You're going to be a good Arena player if you play a lot of Arena. So do that if that is your goal. In general, games in Arena follow the Zoo playstyle. People want to play those same proactive minions that you've been drafting. 1-drop on turn 1, 2-drop on turn 2, 3-drop on turn 3, and you're looking for turns where you can play more than what your opponent has on the board. So if your opponent has a 2-3, he went first, that was his 2-drop, and you're going second, if you can coin a 3-4 to beat his 2-drop, that's what you want to do. You want to look for those opportunities to play something that will beat your opponent's board. And it's very important to do that because you're always playing the tempo game in Arena. Even if you're playing a control deck, you're always playing the tempo game in Arena. Tempo is basically the stat difference on the board. You want to play more stats on the board. And the reason is cards in general, certainly a large number of them, are significantly stronger if you're winning than if you're losing. All right, so let's take a look at our good friend Manatide Totem again. Manatide Totem, if you're losing, if your opponent has more stats on the board than you do, and you play a Manatide Totem, here's what it's going to do. It's going to get killed, it's going to absorb 3 damage, and it's going to draw you a card. So it's 3 mana, draw a card, heal for 3. It's not like horribly bad, but it's not very good, right? You didn't kill anything your opponent played, you just drew a card. That's it. Now, if you're winning, if you have more stuff, if you have more stats than your opponent, and he's not able to attack into your Manatide Totem, the effect of Manatide Totem is you draw twice as many cards as your opponent. So in one case, draw 1 card, heal for 3. In the other case, you draw twice as many cards as your opponent. So you can kind of see the value of these cards in the different states of the game if you're losing versus winning. So you're always trying to be winning on the board. You're always trying to have more stats, more minions, more powerful minions, better minions, taunts, whatever you can. You're trying to have better stuff on your board than your opponent's board because it's going to add a lot more power to the other cards that you're going to play. It's going to give you control over the game. It's going to give you an opportunity to make powerful plays rather than be desperate and play reactively. Now, certainly you have to take consideration for big board clear cards, but that changes. We'll talk about risk reward in a moment here. A few more basic tips. You always want to draw later. You want to draw last. If you're about to lose and you need a card very specifically from your deck, of course you need to play the card draw. But in general, if you're winning on the board, you want to keep winning on the board. But again, you need a little bit of a consideration in the later turns of the game for board clears. Now, if you can constantly play things and not run out of cards, that doesn't really matter. The reason why board clears are effective in Arena is because they generate a lot of value. So if you have like 5 minions and they all die to Flame Strike, and then your opponent plays Flame Strike, that gives you a card disadvantage, but a board clear alone will often not swing the game. Even if you have 5 minions on the board, it's turn 7, your opponent Flame Strikes all of them, kills all of them with 1 card, 5 for 1, ridiculous value, but your opponent didn't play anything. It's your turn, you play a minion, and then your opponent is acting reactively to your minion. So Flame Strike doesn't turn the game around. Most board clears don't turn the game around. Most board clears are designed in larger numbers to constantly clear the board to make the aggressor eventually run out of cards while the control player still has some cards. So that's kind of the idea there. And you want to have that consideration. It doesn't matter if your opponent gets really good value with his board clears, as long as you still have, some options, some cards behind them. So, you want to mix it up. Maybe you want to play a big minion. So if your opponent has a board clear, your big minion can still do some face damage. But when you are getting critically low on cards and your opponent still has a lot of cards, you're going to have to seal out the game fairly quickly, because if you're ever at a state where you're not utilizing your mana efficiently, you're very quickly going to lose the game. So you have to just go face a lot of the time when you start having a massive card disadvantage compared to your opponent. If you're both out of cards, that is not true. It's only if you are about to be out of cards or you are out of cards and your opponent has plenty left over. So, the expert level strategy, certainly this is important because it's not like a step-by-step. It's not like do this, do that, do that. Once you're at 5 wins, start considering this. It's all of it. You have to keep all of this stuff in mind if you want to excel at Arena. In Arena, you have to know which cards are common. Again, you might have to use third-party websites to figure that out. Hearthstone Replay has a nice Arena section. You can see that, certain cards show up a lot more often than others in certain decks. You'll see the same weapons, the same powerful buffs, for instance, in a lot of the Paladin decks. And, if Paladin is really good, you're going to need to draft those cards. You're going to need to play around those cards more often than you normally would. Now, The really interesting thing in Arena, something that you'll certainly have to master, is risk management. This is where I feel I do very well, and it's leveraging your position in your Arena run. Now, I will explain that very quickly here. So once you've played a lot of arenas, you use these Hearth Arena drafting tools, whatever you might, you'll get an idea of how good your deck is at any given time. You might have an extremely good deck, or you might have a pretty bad deck. And after you play dozens and dozens of Arena, you'll know where the average lies. Arena works in a way where if you queue up, you're going to play against an opponent who has the same number of wins and losses as you do. There's a few exceptions if there's not that many people queuing up and you're at high wins, because there's typically not that many people at high wins. You might play someone, like let's say you're at 9-0, you might play someone who's at like 9-2. That's possible. But typically, especially in the early Arena games, that's not the case. If you start your Arena run, you have 0 wins, 0 losses. You're at 0-0. You queue up, you're going to play someone else at 0-0, I think without exception. There's enough people playing at that win record. So at 0-0, you are playing against, by definition, an average Arena deck. If you're at 1-1, you're playing against an average Arena deck. At 2-2, you're playing against an average Arena deck. But if you're at 2-0, you're going to be playing against an above average Arena deck. Once you get to like 5-0, 6-1, 7-1, 8-2, 9-2, you're going to play against extremely exceptional Arena decks, because the deck quality matters and the player quality matters. But at that level of Arena, almost all of those decks are extraordinarily good. And with that knowledge, you have to play differently. Even though, the average Paladin deck might have 1 copy of one specific weapon, the average Paladin deck at 9 wins and 2 losses is probably going to have many copies of those very powerful cards because, well, that's why they are at 9 wins most of the time. And if you know that you're playing an extremely powerful deck, you can play the safe game. You can typically just play a slow control game in the early few wins, because that's when you're playing average decks. So if your deck is above average, you can let your card quality basically win the game for you. Play it safe, no problem. But even with a really good deck, once you get to higher wins, you have to gamble. You really do. You have to take those chances, because a lot of the time, as good as you think your deck might be, at 11-1, you're going to face a better deck almost all of the time. So it's important to manage your risk. So a good example is in the mulligan stage. If you're playing at like 11-1, you might need to take a big risk, full mulligan, just to get specific, extremely powerful 1-drops and 2-drops. Let's say you actually do have a Mana Worm in your deck, and let's say you're playing against a fairly aggressive deck, and let's say you're at 11 wins, and you have 3 cards. Let's say you have like a 3-drop, a 4-drop, and maybe like a Frostbolt or something like that, like a 2-drop removal, which is a pretty good hand. I would certainly keep a hand like that if I was at like, 1-1. Absolutely. 2, 3, 4, no-brainer, right? But if you're at like 11-0 or something, the only way you might actually win is by getting that Mana Worm, is by exactly getting the perfect opening hand. So you might have to gamble. It might only be like, 10-20% chance to actually get that dream opening hand in that situation, but that might be what it takes for you to win that game, because the opponents are so much harder later in Arena. If you're going to play the same way at 1-1 and at 11-0, you're going to lose a lot more. Arena is not the same. It's not like Constructed. In Constructed, people play the same list of like 5, maybe 10 decks if you're lucky, and you know what they play, you know how they play it. It's a consistent game plan. In Arena, you have to change the way you play at all times. You have to manage your risk. You have to think about how good your deck is versus the position of your Arena run at that time. So hopefully with that, I give you guys a bit of a head start in Arena. And as I've mentioned many times in this video, experience counts for a lot. So go out there, play your arenas, and be a better player.